Hi. This is the second video in the tutorial on processing PDF forms. In the first video, we captured the names of the fields in the forms and built a workflow to create a list of all PDF forms located in a specified folder. In this video, we will capture the data entered into the forms and will write that into an Excel file. We are now ready to capture the form field values. While we could read and write each field value to Excel individually, that would slow the process down. Instead, we will populate a list of rows variable with all the data for all forms in the folder. Later, we will write the contents of the list of rows directly into Excel in a single operation. Create a new workflow and call it Capture Form Data. We will need to create the list of files before capturing the data, so add a workflow step and call it Get File Names. Drag in the start method of the Get File Names workflow that we created in the previous video. Now, when we run this workflow, the Get File Names workflow will be run automatically first. Add another step, call it Capture Form Data. Before we set up this step, we need to make sure that the workflow will not run this step until the Get File Names workflow has ended. To make the workflow wait, select the transition and drag in the Get File Names workflow's ended event. Now this transition will wait until the Get File Names workflow ends. Now we need to cycle through each file, so drag in a for each statement and select the list of file names variable. We want to populate a list of rows variable, so create a list of rows variable called form data. We will also need a temporary row variable. We will populate this temporary row variable with all fields values for one form and will then add the row to our list of rows. Name this variable temp row. Let's take a minute to explain how we are going to use the temp row to populate the list of rows. First, we will populate the temp row with the field values from the first PDF form. Then we will add the temp row to the list of rows as the first row. We will then clear the temp row and populate it with the values from the second PDF form. Then we will add the temp row as the second row of the list of rows. We will repeat the process for each of the remaining PDF forms. Drag in the temp rows add element at end method. We want to add one field value to this row. Select the Get PDF Form Field Value function from the PDF built-in service. Enter the directory path. Select the iterator for our for each loop. This will be the name of the file. We will first retrieve the donor's first name. Repeat to add the donor's last name. Repeat the process for all fields you want to capture. We will capture the first name, last name, telephone number, email address, and value text fields. We will also capture the values of the soup kitchen, winter clothing, and school supplies checkboxes. Save. We have now populated the temp row. We must now add that row to the form data list of rows. Drag in the form data variables add element at end method. We want to add our temp row to the form data list of rows, but we can't simply set the input parameter to our temp row. If we did so, the row of data in the form data list will be forever linked to our temp row. When we later replace the values in temp row, the values in the form data list of rows would change too. To prevent that from happening, we instead need to add a duplicate of temp row. From the variables, built-in service, select duplicate. Now set the duplicate input parameter to temp row. Run the workflow. Open the debug panel. Open the form data list. We can see that there are 7 entries. That matches the number of sample files. Open the first one. That looks good. There are 8 data points, 1 for each field we wanted capture. Open it up. The data looks good. Let's look at the data for the last form. Why are there 56 data points? There should have been only 8. The answer is that we forgot to clear our temp row variable at every iteration. This 7th element received all 8 field values for all 7 forms. Return to editing mode. Drag in the temp rows remove all method. Now our temp row will be cleared before processing each form. Save and run the workflow. Inspect the debug panel. The data looks good now. We are now ready to write the captured data to Excel. Add a new step to the workflow and call it Write to Excel. Drag the function Append rows to Excel into the builder. This function is located in the Excel built-in service under Without Excel. Use this function to add more rows below the last populated row in an Excel file. Enter the full path to the file. Enter the sheet name. For the values, select our list of rows variable, form data. Note that we still have one parameter to specify, format. We need to build a row that lists the formats for the 8 columns of data in the form data variable. We will enter all data in the form of text string, except for the value column which we will specify as decimal. Create a new row variable called formats. Drag in its add element at end method 8 times, 1 for each column. Set all the values to string, except for the 5th one which corresponds to the value column. Set the 5th to decimal. We can now populate the format parameter. This parameter expects a list of rows, not just a single row, so we can't enter the formats row just yet. Instead, select temporary list. Add the formats row to the temporary list. Save and run the workflow. Open the Excel file. Note that the values are right-aligned. Excel recognizes them as values because we set the format for that column to decimal. If we select them, we can see that Excel can calculate their total. Return to edit mode in Automation Studio. It is a good practice to add another step to the workflow to clear the values of all our list variables. This way, if you run the workflow again, the variables will not already have data in them. Drag and the remove all methods for all the lists. That completes the tutorial on processing PDF forms. Thank you for watching.